Not every threat to a strong man comes from open hostility. Sometimes it's dressed in admiration. Sometimes it whispers praise. But underneath, it's a strategy. A subtle, calculated mission to reduce his power, to shrink him, to make him forget who he is. And it doesn't start with conflict. It starts with validation. That's the trap. Some women, knowingly or not, target strong men not because they want to support them, but because they want to possess them. And possession, for them, often looks like control disguised as connection. At first, she'll celebrate your strength, your ambition, your independence. But slowly, she'll begin to question it. Not directly, she's smarter than that. She'll use emotions. Guilt, silence, passive disapproval. She'll reframe your assertiveness as selfishness, your focus as detachment, your standards as ego. If you've ever felt like you were praised just to be reshaped, subscribe now. Because this conversation isn't about blame. It's about awareness. This isn't every woman. And this isn't an attack. It's a pattern. And one that Carl Jung hinted at through the lens of projection and anima dynamics. When a woman hasn't made peace with her own wounds, her unconscious may see a powerful man as both a threat and an opportunity. A chance to finally control the energy that once abandoned her, hurt her, or made her feel unseen. But here's the danger for the man. If he doesn't recognize the shift, he starts to edit himself. He softens, not from growth, but from guilt. He loses his edge, his vision, his fire, just to keep the peace. And that peace comes at the cost of his power. That's how it starts. And that's what we'll break down. It rarely happens all at once. The strong man doesn't just wake up one day and find himself compromised. It's subtle. It's slow. And that's why it's dangerous. It begins with small concessions. A softened opinion here. A delayed ambition there. He starts to second-guess himself, not because he's wrong, but because he's absorbing someone else's doubt. Carl Jung wrote about how powerful energies, like the anima, the feminine force within the male psyche, can become distorted when left unconscious. And that's exactly what happens here. Instead of integrating the feminine with clarity and strength, the man begins to surrender to the emotional field without boundaries. He confuses accommodation with love. He mistakes approval for peace. And so, he bends. Until one day, he no longer remembers what standing straight felt like. This is the phase where she no longer needs to attack his power. He does it for her. He tones himself down. He over-explains. He plays smaller. Not because she demanded it explicitly, but because he feared the withdrawal of affection. And fear disguised as loyalty is the quickest path to self-betrayal. When a man forgets his own voice, when he begins filtering every action through how she might feel about it, he's not in a relationship, he's in a performance. And the tragedy? He thinks this is maturity. He thinks this is love. But it's just fear, dressed in compromise. To stay strong, he must learn to recognize this erosion for what it is. Not emotional growth, but emotional manipulation masquerading as intimacy. At first, she admired you, told you how rare you were, how strong, how grounded, how refreshing it was to be with a man who didn't chase approval, and you believed it. Because she wasn't lying, not yet. In the beginning, it was real. It was magnetic. She saw something in you that most overlook: direction, discipline, presence. The kind of presence that doesn't need to be loud to command a room. But something shifted, slowly, quietly. The admiration turned into expectation. The strength she once praised now made her uneasy. Why? Because she couldn't fully influence it. Carl Jung spoke about projection, the tendency to see others not as they are, but as a reflection of our inner world. A woman who hasn't reconciled her fear of abandonment or her need for dominance might unconsciously try to tame what she can't predict. Your independence starts to feel like rejection. Your mission becomes a threat to her emotional security. And now, the game begins. Not overt, not confrontational. It's quiet, it's emotional, and it's deeply strategic, though even she may not fully realize she's playing it. She doesn't ask you to be weak. That would be obvious. Instead, she asks you to be more available, more present, more emotionally open on her terms. She frames it as intimacy, as connection. But the subtext is clear. Soften your edges, lessen your fire, become less yourself. And those terms always lead to one place: less of your edge, more of her comfort. Suddenly, your strength isn't safe anymore. It's something she needs to neutralize, not because it's wrong, but because it's untouchable. You start apologizing for being focused. You second-guess your instincts. You begin to filter yourself. You hesitate where you once acted with certainty. You listen more than you speak, not from respect, but from caution. You become careful, tentative. You're still you, but only at 70%. And the longer you stay in that dynamic, the more you forget what 100% felt like. What it felt like to move with unapologetic clarity. That's the danger. And here's the kicker. She might not even know she's doing it. That's what makes it so powerful. It's not an open attack. It's emotional erosion. Gradual, rationalized, dressed in the language of love and care. That's why most men don't see it until it's too late. By the time you realize you've been shaped, it's already become a habit. When praise turns into pressure, strength turns into submission. Power becomes apology, and most men don't realize it until they're already fading. But you're not most men. You're waking up. And waking up means remembering who you were before the slow edits began. There's always a reward for shrinking. That's what makes it seductive. The moment you start softening, the tension goes down. She seems calmer. The emotional highs and lows smooth out. You get praised again for being more open, more balanced, more loving. But it's not the kind of praise that strengthens you. It's the kind that keeps you small. Because the reward isn't for who you are, it's for who you've become under her influence. Carl Jung wrote that if you adapt too much to the outer world, you lose connection to your inner one. And that's what happens here. You're rewarded for betraying your instincts, not directly, not maliciously, but psychologically. The message is clear. Don't be too independent. Don't be too focused. Don't be too powerful. Make yourself digestible, palatable, and you'll be loved. And at first, that feels like a win. You're less in conflict. She seems happy. Things are smoother. But deep down, a fire starts to dim. You know it. You feel it. You don't move the same. You don't speak with the same weight. You stop trusting your gut. Not because it stopped working, but because someone taught you to second guess it. Slowly, you become more reactive and less rooted, more emotional and less disciplined. You confuse peace with passivity. That's the trap. The praise you're getting isn't real. It's a leash. And every time you trade your power for temporary harmony, you train yourself to be less. Less bold, less certain, less true. Until one day, you look in the mirror and realize you're not leading your life anymore. You're just managing her emotions. That's not strength. That's surrender in disguise. And it's time to take it back. Weak men don't get tested. They're easy to manage, easy to control. But a strong man, he's a challenge. And for some women, that challenge becomes an obsession, not to elevate him, but to tame him. Because taming him proves something. It validates a deep, unresolved wound, a belief that says, if I can bring him down, I'm finally safe. I'm finally worthy. Carl Jung believed that we attract what we need to face in ourselves. And sometimes, what we attract is an unconscious attempt to fix a story that started long before us. If a woman grew up feeling powerless around men, absent fathers, unstable partners, betrayal masked as love, she may develop an unconscious need to control what once controlled her. So she finds strength, gets close to it, and then tries to reshape it. Not always consciously. But the patterns are real. This is why the strong are targeted. Because they're visible. They stand out. Their energy stirs something. It threatens those who've built safety around predictability, around dominance, around emotional leverage. A strong man cannot be easily manipulated, and that makes him dangerous. Not because he's aggressive, but because he's self-led. And here's where it gets twisted. The woman who says she wants strength might not know how to coexist with it. She may ask for it and then try to soften it. She may test it, doubt it, criticize it, until it bends. And the moment it bends, the dynamic changes. The man loses a part of himself. She loses respect. No one wins. But the cycle continues. Being strong isn't just about being unbreakable. It's about being aware. Aware of the games, the projections, the traps dressed as connection. Because strength without awareness gets compromised. But strength with awareness, that's when a man becomes unshakable. You want to stay strong? Start by recognizing why you were targeted in the first place. It wasn't because you were wrong. It was because you were powerful. A man doesn't lose his strength all at once. He loses it in micro moments. In every apology he doesn't mean. In every instinct he second guesses. In every moment he stays quiet when his soul tells him to speak. And once he's dulled himself enough times, something terrifying happens. He thinks it's growth. He confuses suppression with maturity. He calls his silence emotional intelligence. But it's not. It's erosion. Carl Jung believed that the shadow, the part of us we hide, repress, and deny, holds our vitality. And when a man gives up pieces of himself to keep the peace, that energy doesn't disappear. It goes into the shadow. And that shadow grows bitter. It starts to sabotage. It whispers, "This isn't who you are." It burns for expression. And if it's denied long enough, it either turns into depression or destruction. Reclaiming your strength doesn't mean becoming harsh. It means becoming whole. It means saying what you mean, even when it shakes the room. It means holding the line, even if it costs you the approval you once craved. It means recognizing the difference between compromise and self-betrayal. A strong man isn't the one who never bends. He's the one who knows when to walk away before he breaks. You weren't made to shrink. You weren't built to explain your power like it's a problem. The fire in you isn't toxic. It's your signal. And any relationship, any dynamic, any person that tries to smother that fire in the name of love is not love. It's control. You don't need permission to return to yourself. You need courage. And that courage starts now. There comes a moment when the strong man realizes something. The power he was trying to protect never needed defending. It only needed remembering. Because the truth is, real strength doesn't argue. It doesn't justify. It doesn't negotiate its presence to be liked. It simply is. And once you understand that, you stop trying to prove your worth. You stop bending to be seen as good enough for anyone who feels safer when you're less. This is what Carl Jung called individuation. The process of becoming whole, not through pleasing others, but by integrating every part of yourself. Your ambition, your silence, your focus, your rage, your discipline, the parts the world told you to tone down, the parts that made some people uncomfortable. Those parts are not flaws. They're not mistakes. They're pieces of your power. The man who's fully stepped into himself doesn't need validation. He doesn't shrink when questioned. He doesn't need to be understood because he's no longer performing. He knows that the right woman won't feel threatened by his fire. She'll respect it. She won't ask him to dim down. She'll know how to stand in her own light. The trap was never about being with someone. It was about forgetting yourself in the process. And the escape isn't revenge. It's not bitterness. It's not dominance. It's returning to your center, clear, calm, immovable. This kind of man isn't easy to manipulate. He's not reactive. He's not hungry for approval, and that makes him rare, dangerous, untouchable. That's what you're becoming now. There's a moment where you finally see it, not because she told you, not because anyone warned you, but because the man in the mirror feels like a watered-down version of the one you used to be. You're not broken. You're not depressed. You're just dimmed. And now you realize you've been living inside her frame. Her emotions defined the rules. Her moods dictated the rhythm. And your strength? It was filtered, translated, and slowly reshaped into something she could manage. This is where most men either retreat or explode. They either go silent, disappearing into compliance, or they detonate, walking away in a blaze of regret and rage. But there's a third option. One Nietzsche would have called a higher path, the quiet exit. Not dramatic, not emotional, just clear. You stop explaining. You stop arguing about who changed. You simply stop negotiating your identity. Because the most dangerous man is not the one who fights to be free. It's the one who remembers he already is. You don't owe anyone your dilution. You don't need a permission slip to return to your full strength. You reclaim your mission. You return to discipline. You sharpen your instincts again, not to hurt anyone, but to stop betraying yourself. And that's when she notices. Not because you raised your voice, but because your silence now carries weight. You're no longer reactive, no longer controllable. And that's not just power, it's freedom. That's when the game ends, not with a scream, but with a man who knows who he is and refuses to be anything less again. There's a moment, quiet but unmistakable, when you stop folding, when you stop filtering, when the part of you that's been dimmed down finally reclaims its voice. And in that moment, the dynamic shifts. You're no longer performing. You're no longer apologizing. You're no longer scared of making waves. You stand up straighter, speak clearer, and walk differently, not to dominate, but to exist fully. And this is when the panic sets in. For anyone who was attached to the version of you they could shape, your return to self is a threat. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're no longer easily managed. The woman who tried to make you small will feel it. She may not say it, but she'll feel the change in posture, the silence where there used to be compliance, the edge returning to your voice, the refusal to be emotionally manipulated. And it will unnerve her. She'll test you, try to pull you back into softness, into explanation, into guilt. Because power, true masculine power, exposes her game. It forces her to either evolve or retreat, and not everyone is ready to face themselves. It's easier to call you distant than to admit you're just done shrinking. Jung understood this. He knew that when the unconscious is exposed to truth, it either breaks open or attacks. When you refuse to stay small, You hold up a mirror, and not everyone wants to see their reflection. This is where most men fold again. They see the discomfort, the disapproval, and they retreat. But you won't. Because now you know what's happening. And now, the only way forward is through. You're not becoming someone new. You're becoming who you were before the edits, before the emotional leash, before the slow erosion of self. And once that man returns, there's no going back. At some point, you stop asking if you're too much. You stop negotiating your presence. You stop explaining your clarity, your ambition, your discipline. And when that day comes, when you choose your fire over their comfort, you become something most people can't handle. Unapologetically whole. Carl Jung believed that wholeness wasn't found by becoming something new, but by reclaiming what we've abandoned. The assertiveness you toned down, the decisiveness you buried, the instincts you filtered to seem more agreeable. That's what gets restored when you finally stop shrinking, and not just for others, but for the illusion of peace. When a woman targets a strong man, she's not always conscious of it. Sometimes she's reenacting old stories, trying to control what once made her feel small. But once you see it, once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You don't hate her, you don't blame her, but you no longer bend for her comfort. You no longer dim your light to keep the room calm. This isn't about ego. It's about integrity. Because when you bend to fit someone else's emotional expectations, you break your alignment. You erode your truth. And over time, you disappear. Not all at once, just inch by inch, until you wake up and realize you're performing instead of leading. So here's the shift. You stop performing. You let your presence speak. You let your silence mean something. You say no without explanation. You set boundaries that don't wobble when tested. And you let the chips fall. If she walks, she was never walking with you. If she stays, it's because she sees the real you and she respects it. The men who refuse to shrink become forces. Not because they shout, but because they no longer apologize. Not because they dominate, but because they refuse to be domesticated. And in a world addicted to control, that kind of freedom is terrifying. Be terrifying. Be whole.